At 6:11 hours, a drainage ditch 200 meters south of Utwiller, Sarpalatinate, Germany. 13 March 1945. The fog was moving left to right at roughly 4 miles an hour, and one man in that ditch was the only American alive who cared. Mortar rounds walked across the plowed field behind him, 3, 4, 5, each one throwing up a black fountain of thawed German dirt that came down again as rain. Somewhere to his rear, a half-track was burning with a sound like a man clearing his throat over and over. Somebody was screaming for a medic in a voice that had already stopped expecting one. Private First Class Solomon Rideout did not look up. He was flat in 8 inches of ice water. His field jacket had gone from wool to sponge 2 hours earlier. His right glove was cut off, actually, at the knuckle, because he needed to feel the click, and his bare fingers were the color of old candle wax. In front of him, 410 meters out, 7 men in SS Field Gray were crossing open ground at a jog. Not walking, not crawling, running, which meant they thought nothing out here could touch them at that distance. They had good reason to think so. 9 hours earlier, his own platoon sergeant had put it in writing. Rideout SPFC, no engagement beyond 300 yards, no ranging fire, no exceptions, signed, initialed, passed up. A field expedient order, and in plain English it meant the Army had banned the only thing this man knew how to do. His left hand came off the rifle for 1 second. Went to his collar, to a bootlace and something small and dark hanging on the end of it, a piece of carved wood, cracked along the grain, worn smooth as a river stone. He pressed it once against his lower lip, made no sound. Then his hand came back to the traversing wheel and he turned it 11 clicks left. Understand what you are watching. This is not a man aiming at a target. This is a man aiming at a place a target has not arrived at yet. The wind was pushing the fog left to right. The frost on the beat tops 50 meters out was melting in one direction and not the other, and a column of gray smoke was rising over the Herlenhof farm, smoke from a fire that had not been there at 5:30, because at 5:30 he had lit it himself. Remember that. He set that fire. The first German went down at 6:13 hours without ever hearing the shot that killed him, because the wind carrying the sound was the same wind carrying the bullet, and Solomon Rideout had already done that arithmetic in his head. 6 left, running, and in a farmhouse cellar 800 meters north, a man was about to pick up a field telephone and ask the only question that mattered. How many Americans are out there? He was going to get the wrong answer for the next 4 hours. Pull back. Look at the board. On 13 March 1945, the U.S. 7th Army launched Operation Undertone into the Sarpalatinate. The 12th Armored Division, the Hellcats, pushed northeast out of Alsace toward the Siegfried Line's southern shoulder. Their objective sounded simple on an acetate map. Take the villages, hold the road junctions, keep moving. What the map did not show was the ground. The Palatinate in March is not the hedgerow country of Normandy. It is open. Beet fields and winter wheat, plowed flat, drained by ditches, cut by farm tracks, rising in long, slow swells with a stone village on top of every one. In that country, a rifle is worth more than a tank, because you can see for a mile and everything that moves is a bug on a plate. Facing the 17th Armored Infantry Battalion that morning were elements of the 17 SS Panzer Grenadier Division, Gertz von Berlichingen, a formation that had been bleeding since Normandy and had learned every lesson bleeding teaches. They had lost their armor. They had not lost their tradecraft. They had MG-42s sited in stone barns with pre-registered fields of fire. They had 8 cm mortars behind the ridge, and they had something the Americans in that ditch did not have: elevation and a dry place to lie down. Now the imbalance. The American platoon that reached the drainage ditch south of Utwiller at 400 hours numbered 31 men. By 600, it numbered 19. They had no armor support. The tanks were held up at a blown culvert 1,100 meters back. They had one working SCR-300 radio with a battery reading low. They had 4 bazooka rounds, 2 of them water-soaked. And they had one designated marksman with a rifle nobody in the battalion could identify on sight. The 19 men in that ditch were a mixed platoon, and in the United States Army of March 1945, that was itself a historical event. Following the December 1944 volunteer call, black soldiers, most of them stripped of stripes to qualify, quartermasters and truck drivers and ammunition handlers who gave up rank for the privilege of being shot at, were formed into rifle platoons and attached to white infantry and armored infantry companies. The 12th Armored Division received several of them. They arrived in March. They were told they were on trial. Riedel was on trial for something else. Enemy POV, SS Hauptsturmführer ERWIN Zornmuller, Seller CP, Herlenhof Farm, 6:25 hours. The runner is soaked and stammering, and Zornmuller does not look up from the map. Bittner is dead, the boy says, crossing the low field, 400 meters from the American line, perhaps more. Zornmuller marks it with a pencil and feels nothing in particular. A lucky round. The Americans fire an enormous quantity of ammunition at nothing. Occasionally, the nothing has a man in it. He has watched their marksmen work patient, doctrinal, unwilling past 300 meters. It is a matter of training, and it is not a matter of concern. Tell the section to keep moving, he says. Do not let them bunch. He returns to the road junction. Outside, the wind changes and a smell of burning hay comes down the slope, and he does not think about it at all. At 6:40, the platoon leader, a 23-year-old lieutenant named Karsh who had been in country for 9 days, called battalion and asked for smoke and armor. Battalion said hold. At 6:44, Staff Sergeant Del Prochaska crawled the length of the ditch and stopped where Riedel lay and said what he had already said in writing the night before. Riedel's technique required a ranging shot, a deliberate, wasted round fired into water or mud so he could watch the splash and read what the air had done to it. To Prochaska, that was one thing and one thing only: a muzzle flash, in the open, telling every German on the ridge exactly where the platoon was hiding. He was not wrong. That is the thing you have to sit with. He was not wrong. 300 yards, Prochaska said. You hear me? You give away this ditch and you kill all of us. Riedel said, yes, Sergeant. And in a stone barn on the ridge, an MG-42 crew was already traversing onto the ditch because the Germans had not needed a muzzle flash to find them. They had needed a map, and they'd had one since 1940. By 700 hours, 19 men were pinned in 8 inches of water, in the open, in daylight, with no armor, no smoke, and orders not to shoot back at anything more than a football field away. Do that math. To understand what happened in that ditch, you have to go somewhere very far from it. Go to the Atchafalaya Basin, Louisiana. Go to a shotgun house on stilts outside Catahoula with a workbench under it, and a hand-cranked forge that Solomon's father, Alcide Riedel, had built out of a truck brake drum in 1919. Alcide was a market hunter before the law shut market hunting down, and afterward he was a guide, and always, quietly, without a license and without a sign, a gunsmith. He rebarreled shotguns for men who paid in catfish. He straightened bent rib sights by feel. He could tell you what a barrel was doing wrong by the sound it made, the way a mechanic can hear a rod knock. And every October, he took his son out into the flooded timber before daylight and taught him the only real lesson the family had to give. You do not shoot where the bird is. You shoot where the bird is going to be, and the wind gets a vote. It is 1932 and the boy is 11 and the water is black and the sky is the color of a nickel. His father does not say aim. His father says, watch the moss. Watch the smoke off the coffee. Watch the way the ducks bank on final and how far the wind pushes them off the line they meant to fly. His father takes a cigarette he does not smoke, lights it, and lets it burn on the gunnel, not to smoke it, to read it. The smoke leans. It leans a little at the water and more at the height of the trees. 2 winds, his father says, always 2 winds, sometimes 3. The one you feel on your face is the liar. The boy shoots, he misses. He shoots again, he misses. And then on the 9th try, a Wijan crossing left at 30 yards and a hard south push folds like a dropped coat, and Alcide Rideout does not say anything at all. He just reaches over and puts something in his son's hand. A duck call. Cypress. Hand turned on a foot lathe, cracked along the grain from a winter when the wood froze wet. The reed was gone, had been gone for years. It made no sound, it could not make a sound. His father had carried it since 1911. Why give me a call that don't call? The boy asked, and Alcide said, because a man who needs to make noise ain't learned nothing yet. That is the object. A silent duck call on a bootlace. 6 inches of cracked cypress that had already outlived one man's whole working life. Alcide Rideout died in November 1938 of a stroke on the floor of the shop, and Solomon found him there with a barrel vise still clamped shut, and the boy was 17, and the shop was gone by the following spring because the note was held at the bank in town, and the bank in town did not extend notes to families like theirs. He worked levee crews. He worked a rice mill. He kept the call in his shirt pocket where the reed hole would fill with dust. He enlisted in 1943 and was made a truck driver, because that is what the Army did. For 19 months, Solomon Rideout hauled 105 ammunition, gasoline in 5-gallon cans, and other men's laundry across France. He requalified expert with the M1 twice on ranges he was not supposed to be on, using ammunition he had signed for himself. Both scorecards were filed and neither was ever forwarded. A company clerk at Camp Claiborne had told him why, years earlier, in the flat, friendly voice men use when they think they're being reasonable. Nobody's gonna believe a colored boy shot that, so I'm doing you a favor not sending it. He said thank you. He remembers saying thank you. He told his granddaughter in 1991 that saying thank you was the single worst thing he ever did in his life, and he included the war in that. There was a lieutenant at a range outside Metz in October 1944 who watched him put 5 rounds into a 4-inch group at 300 yards, offhand, in a crosswind, and called 3 other officers over to look at the target. Then that lieutenant asked which of the white boys had actually fired it. Rideout did not answer. He picked up his brass. He walked back to the truck. That is the character moment, not defiance, not a speech. A man picking up his own brass while 4 officers discussed whether he existed. When the volunteer call came in December, give up your stripes, go to the line, go where the shooting is, he signed the sheet in about 4 seconds. He gave up a technician's rating and $11 a month. His company first sergeant asked him why on earth he would do that. He said, because up there ain't nobody can tell me I didn't hit it. The weapon knowledge came from the shop under the house, and it never left him. He had rebuilt a Model 12 with a file and a stone by the time he was 14. He understood chamber pressure by feel and headspace by sound. And somewhere in the winter of 1944, in a motor pool at Sarahburg, he had started looking at the U.S. Army's sniper rifle, the M1903A4, and thinking, with real professional irritation, this thing was built by people who have never had to hit something that was moving. He was right. And in about 10 weeks he was going to prove it. Hit subscribe now if you want to see what he built, because it's the part the Army pretended didn't happen. 7-12 hours. The MG-42 in the stone barn found the ditch. It did not find it gradually. 1 second the platoon was cold, and the next second the lip of the ditch was disintegrating in a line, left to right, throwing frozen clods and wet grass, and Corporal Anselm Boyce, 20 years old, from Mobile, a man who had been a stevedore in November, was hit through both thighs and went under the water and came up screaming in a register nobody in that ditch had heard before. 1,200 rounds a minute. That is not a number. That is a sound like canvas tearing in the hands of God. 7:16 hours. The radio died. Not shot, the battery simply reached the end of a cold night and stopped, and the RTO kept talking into it for another 40 seconds because he could not accept it. 7:21 hours. Lieutenant Karsh ordered a rush to the sunken farm track 60 meters east. It was, on paper, the right call: get out of the beaten zone, get defilade. Rideout said flatly, without raising his head, "Sir, that track's registered. They've been dropping mortar on it every 11 minutes since we got here." Karsh, 9 days in country, said, "Noted." 8 men went. 4 came back. The mortar landed 30 seconds after they entered the track, because Rideout had counted the intervals for 3 hours the way a man counts a fever. Nobody in that ditch ever forgot that he was right and that being right changed nothing. Here is where the story turns, so watch closely. Rideout's rifle was not a rifle, not anymore. He had started with an M1903A4, the standard Army sniper rifle of 1944, a Springfield with the iron sights deleted, wearing a Weaver 330C commercial telescope redesignated M.B. 2.5 power, a hunting scope essentially bolted onto a war. It fogged. Its adjustments were coarse and unrepeatable. You turned the dial, and the reticle moved when it felt like it. It could not be loaded with stripper clips because the scope sat over the bridge, and at 400 meters in a crosswind against a moving man, it was, in Rideout's professional judgment, a good rifle wearing a bad idea. So over 6 weeks he had built something else out of 3 things. 1. The 1903A4 barreled action itself. Because the barrel was excellent and the trigger was honest, and the 03 would shoot better than any man could hold it. That was the accuracy. 2. A captured Zeiss ZF-39, 4 power, taken off a wrecked K98K sniper rifle near Herleshheim in January and traded for 2 cartons of Chesterfields and a jerrycan. The Zeiss had what no American optic in that battalion had: a windage drum and an elevation drum with hard, repeatable, numbered clicks, calibrated in a system a man could do arithmetic with. He filed a mount for it out of the splittering bases from a wrecked Redfield Jr., and a strip of 1/4-inch steel cut from a Jeep bumper bracket, drilled it on a battalion maintenance drill press at Sarahburg without asking, and lapped the rings with valve compound stolen from an ordnance company. That was the correction. 3. And this is the part nobody expected: the traversing and elevating mechanism off a wrecked M1919A4 machine gun tripod. Think about what a T and E does. On a machine gun, it lets a gunner return to a registered point in total darkness by counting clicks: so many mils left, so many mils up. It is a mechanical memory. It is a slide rule made of brass and steel. Rideout bolted the rifles formed into a padded cradle of his own making, sheet steel, leather from a ruined saddle and hose clamps, and mounted that cradle to the T and E on a cut-down M2 tripod. Now his rifle did not need to be held. It needed to be dialed. And a dialed rifle can lead a running man. Here is why that mattered in plain language. A man jogging across your front at 400 meters moves roughly 3 meters in the time your bullet takes to get there. You have to shoot at empty ground and let him run into it. Do that freehand in wind and you are guessing. Do it on a T and E with a wind value you have measured and clicks you can count, and you are calculating. But calculating requires data. And that is where the ban came from. Rydell's method needed a wind he could see, not feel. See. His father's lesson, the wind on your face is the liar. So he read 3 layers: frost melt at the near ground, grass and beat tops at mid, and smoke or fog drift at height, and when he could not get all 3, he fired 1 round into standing water or soft mud and read the splash offset. 1 round, 1 flash, 1 betrayal of position. That was what Prochaska banned. That was the entire crime. 7:48 hours. Rydell crawled 40 meters west to a culvert head, where he could see the low field and the ridge road. He had 18 rounds of .3006 M2 ball and 11 rounds of M72 match he had been hoarding since Christmas. He had no water. He had not eaten since 1900 hours the previous evening. He had a bruised kidney from a rifle butt 3 days before that he had told no one about, and blood in his urine that he had noticed at 300 and decided was not relevant. His left hand was going numb, not from cold, from lying on it. And the field in front of him had no wind indicators at all. Plowed dirt, no standing water, fog too high to read at the bullet's flight path, frost already gone. He could not see the wind, and he could not fire a ranging shot. 7:59 hours. He looked north to the Herlenhof, a working German farm 460 meters up the slope, stone barn, a hay rick, and 2 clamped beet pulp piles in the yard, a house with the shutters closed. There was a wood pile. There was a cellar hatch. There were, he had seen at first light through the Zeiss, chickens. Chickens meant somebody was feeding them. He took the white phosphorus grenade off his harness, and he crawled 90 meters up the drainage ditch, and at 8:06 hours he threw it into the hay rick in the yard of the Herlenhof farm. Dry hay and beet pulp burned thick and slow and low. The smoke came up in a column and then leaned, and it leaned differently at 3 meters than it did at 15, and there it was. The wind, made visible. 4 to 5 miles an hour at ground level, closer to 8 aloft, quartering from the left across the whole low field, exactly the geometry he needed. He crawled back. He did not look at the house. The narrator will not tell you what to feel about that. It is in the record that the Herlenhof outbuildings burned on 13 March 1945. It is in the record that the property was occupied. Those are the 2 facts. They sit next to each other. Enemy POV, SS Hauptsturmführer, ERWAN Zornmüller, Ridge Road, Herlenhof, 834 HOURS. The second report does not make sense, and Zornmüller reads it twice. 3 men down in 11 minutes, all 3 moving. All 3 at ranges his own instructors would have called wasteful, and no supporting fire, no mortar, no machine gun walking in behind. Single rounds, spaced, unhurried. He goes to the road and looks south with his binoculars at 400 meters of empty plowed ground and sees nothing whatsoever, and that is the part that turns in his stomach like a swallowed stone. "Krantz," he says to his adjutant, and his voice is entirely level. "How many marksmen do the Americans put in a rifle platoon?" "An Hauptsturmführer, sometimes none." "Then there are 4 out there," Zornmüller says. "Bring the mortars onto the ditch line, all of it." 9:02 hours. They brought the mortars onto the ditch line. All of it. Rydell was blown off the culvert head by a round that landed 11 meters behind him. He came to on his back in the water with his ears ringing at a pitch like a struck wineglass, and a piece of his own rifle cradle, a hose clamp, sheared, buried 2 inches into the meat of his left forearm. He pulled it out. He put a field dressing on it with his teeth and his right hand. The arm still worked, barely. The rifle had landed muzzle down in the mud. He cleared the bore with a bootlace and a strip of undershirt, which took 4 minutes, which is a very long time. And then he checked the Zeiss, and the Zeiss was full of water. That is the moment, not the wound. The scope. He lay in the water with a ruined optic and a dead radio and a numb arm and 15 men behind him. And Solomon Rydell, who had never in his life said a word about any of it, not at Claiborne, not at Metz, not at the range where 4 officers discussed whether he was real, put his face down into 8 inches of German drainage water and stopped. He was done. Understand that clearly. He was done, and he had earned the right to be. His right hand came up to his collar out of pure habit. Cypress cracked along the grain. Silent. He held it against his lower lip the way his father had held a cigarette he never smoked, and he did not pray, and he did not make a speech, and nobody heard him say anything because he did not say anything. He put the call back inside his collar. Then he unscrewed the eyepiece of the Zeiss with the blade of his bayonet, drained it, wiped the internal lens with the dry inside hem of his shirttail, sealed the threads with candle wax off a K-ration heat tab, and reassembled it. 9:47 hours. He crawled back up the ditch. Behind him, a wounded 17-year-old German conscript named Willy Damk, hit in the ankle during the first exchange and dragged into the American ditch at 7:30 by a medic who couldn't tell field gray from field gray at that distance, watched all of this from 11 feet away, and would remember one detail about it for the next 50 years. We will come back to Willy Damk. 11:14 hours. The counterattack came down the low field the way SS counterattacks came down everything in March 1945. Fast, dispersed, and utterly professional. 2 sections. Roughly 18 men, bounding by pairs, using the plow furrows, moving at a jog, and behind them the MG42 in the barn opening up to pin the ditch so nobody in it could lift a head. Nobody in it did lift a head, except one man who had spent the last 90 minutes doing nothing but arithmetic. He had the wind. Smoke off the Herlenhof, still burning, still leaning 4 at the ground, 8 aloft, quartering left. He had the range, walked in by map, and by the fence posts he'd counted at first light. The low field crossing was 410 to 440 meters. He had a rifle on a machine gun T&E that could be dialed to a specific patch of empty dirt and held there while a man ran into it. And he had the one thing the technique actually required, which was permission he had not been given. Prochaska was 11 meters away and screaming at him not to fire. Solomon Rideout reached inside his collar with 2 fingers, pressed 6 inches of silent cypress against his lower lip, and held it there for 2 full seconds. You do not shoot where the bird is. He put his hand back on the traversing wheel. The first peak. He did not track. That is the thing the men in that ditch could not process afterward, and it is the thing that broke Zornmuller. He never moved the rifle with the target. He dialed to a point in the empty furrows, 11 clicks of left windage, 3 up, and waited. And when a running man crossed into that point, the rifle fired and the man went down 430 meters away in a full stride. And Rideout's hand was already on the traverse wheel counting 2, 3, 4 to the next furrow before the first body had finished falling. Second man at 11:14 and 40 seconds. Third at 11:15. Fourth at 11:15 and 20 seconds. He worked the bolt with 2 fingers of a numb left hand, and it took him longer than the aiming did. 4 men down in 81 seconds, all of them running, all of them past 400 meters, in an 8-mile crosswind, by a man reading smoke from a fire he had lit himself. The second peak. At the 5th shot the rifle did not fire. A cracked case head, the round separated in the chamber and left half of itself welded in there by heat and pressure. And the extractor tore through the rim, and the bolt came back holding nothing. On a bench in Louisiana that is a 20-minute job with a broken case extractor. In a ditch it is a rifle that has become a steel club. The remaining Germans were at 300 meters and closing, and the MG42 had walked onto the culvert head, and the water around him was jumping. Rideout rolled onto his back, fully exposed. Mud to the neck got the bayonet, drove the point down inside the chamber against the shoulder of the separated brass, and levered. It didn't move. He levered again. He tore the wound in his left forearm completely open doing it, and the brass came free at 11:17 hours with a sound he described 46 years later as the best sound I ever heard, and I heard my daughter born. He got back on the gun with his sleeve full of blood. The Zeiss had held its wax seal. The third peak. Fifth man at 11:18, at 290 meters, moving right to left. Sixth man at 11:18 and 30 seconds, and this one Rideout did not shoot at where he was going. This one had stopped behind a beat clamp with only a shoulder and a slice of helmet showing, and Rideout put a round through 11 inches of frozen beet pulp, because he had spent November learning what frozen beet pulp does to a .3006 at 300 meters, which is almost nothing. The seventh man was the section leader, an SS Oberscharführer, standing up out of a furrow at 240 meters to wave the survivors back, and he went down mid-gesture, and the low field went still. 11:19 hours. And then nothing. Stop. Look at what just happened. 17th Armored Infantry Battalion, 12th Armored Division, south of Utwiller, Sarpalatinate, 13 March 1945, 11:14 hours to 11:19 hours. Before, enemy in the assault, 18 SS Panzergrenadiers in 2 sections, 1 MG-42 in supporting Stone Barn, 2 X-8CM mortars in defilade, holding approximately 900 meters of the Utwiller approach, friendly forces available to Rideout. 15 effectives remaining of 31, 1 dead radio, 4 bazooka rounds, 2 unserviceable, no armor, no artillery on call, no smoke. After, enemy killed by Rideout, confirmed by Battalion S2 sweep at 16:20 hours. 7, enemy dead in total at that position. 11, enemy captured that afternoon. 9, including 4 who came in voluntarily, ground held. The ditch line, and with it the Utwiller approach, until armor arrived at 13:41 hours, American lives saved, estimated by the battalion commander in his endorsement. 15 rounds expended by Rideout, 11:14 to 11:19. 8 time elapsed, 5 minutes. 1 man. 8 rounds. 7 moving targets, sit with that. Enemy POV, SS Hauptsturmführer ERWIN Zonmuller, Ridge Road, 11:26 hours. He has the binoculars up and he is counting his own dead in the furrows, and the count will not come out the way tactics say it must. 7 men. 5 minutes. No supporting fire, no mortar, no machine gun, only single shots, and between them a pause exactly long enough for a bolt. Every one of them moving. Every one of them past the range at which such things are done. Krantz is saying something about a machine gun with a telescope. Zonmuller lowers the glasses and looks at the smoke coming off the burning farm below him, and at the way it leans, and something arrives in him that is not fear and is worse than fear. It is comprehension. He burned the hay to see the wind, Zonmuller says. Krantz does not understand. He set a fire so he could watch the air, Zonmuller says. There is one of them. There is only ever one of them. And I have been fighting him since dawn, as though he were a company. He gave that sentence, there is only ever one of them, to an American interrogator at Bad Kreuznach in April 1945, to a Bundeswehr lecture hall in 1961, and to his own sons more times than they could count. The silence afterward was its own event. There was no cheering in that ditch. That is not what happened. 15 filthy men lay in pink water and did not speak, and the fire at the Herlenhof popped and settled, and somewhere a wounded German was calling for his mother in a voice that got quieter over about 10 minutes and then didn't. Staff Sergeant Del Prochaska crawled the length of the ditch a second time that day. He stopped where Rideout lay with his face on a wet leather cheek piece, his left sleeve black to the elbow, his hands shaking so badly he could not have loaded the rifle again if he'd wanted to. Prochaska looked at the weapon, the American receiver, the German scope, the machine gun tripod. He looked at the field. He opened his mouth twice. What he finally said, according to two men who heard it, was, "I'm gonna need to know how you did that." And Solomon Rideout, PFC, U.S. Army, who had picked up his own brass at Metz while four officers debated whether he was real, said, "You banned it at 400 yards, Sergeant." Then he closed his eyes and slept for 90 minutes in 8 inches of ice water while other men watched the field. The armor came up at 13:41 hours. Utwiller fell that afternoon. The 12th Armored Division continued northeast, reached the Rhine, and crossed at Worms 11 days later. In the sweep of the campaign, 5 minutes in a drainage ditch is nothing. In the lives of 15 men, it was everything, and they knew the difference even if the paperwork did not. Here is what the paperwork did. Lieutenant Karsh recommended Rideout for the Distinguished Service Cross on 15 March 1945. The recommendation went up through battalion, where the commander endorsed it. It was downgraded at division to a Bronze Star. The citation, which survives, describes the action in 91 words and does not mention the range, does not mention the rifle, does not mention the wind, and does not mention that he had been ordered not to fire. It does not mention 7. It says, a number of enemy. At the same time, the same week in the same battalion, Rideout was formally reprimanded on the record for unauthorized modification of a government-issue weapon and appropriation of ordnance property, specifically 1M 1919A4 traversing and elevating mechanism, and 1M2 tripod. The reprimand is 4 times longer than the citation. Read that again. The document praising him was shorter than the document punishing him for how he did it. The rifle itself was confiscated by an ordnance officer at Worms on 26 March 1945, and according to a maintenance log entry, returned to serviceable configuration, meaning the cradle was cut off, the Zeiss was removed, and the whole thing was made ordinary again. That rifle is gone. Nobody knows where. What did survive was the method. In April 1945, a warrant officer in the 12th Armored's Ordnance Section wrote a 2-page memorandum on field expedient stabilization of the M1903A4 using machine gun T and E hardware, along with notes on multi-layer wind observation. It was forwarded to 7th Army. It went nowhere in 1945. Elements of it read like a first draft of doctrine that the U.S. Army would not formally adopt for another 25 years. The mechanically indexed hold, the observed rather than estimated wind, the discipline of firing at a point instead of tracking a target. The memorandum does not name Rideout. It says a marksman of this command. Witness testimony, WILLIDAMKE, former Grenadier, 17. SSBANZERGRNADIR Division. Sworn account given 9 October 1947, Ludwigshafen. He was 17, and his ankle was shattered, and he lay 11 feet from the American in the water, and he expected all morning to be shot. He tells the interviewer that the American never once spoke to the other Americans during the shooting, not a word, but he was talking quietly, steadily, in a language Damk did not know and later learned was French or something close to it. Numbers. He was counting, not shots. Damk is very clear about this, and it is the detail nobody else recorded and nobody has ever explained. The counting did not stop when the rifle fired. He was counting something else, Damk says. The whole time. I have thought about it my entire life. The abuse did not stop after 13 March. That is the part that gets left out of the redemption version of this story, so we will not leave it out. The mixed platoons of the 12th Armored were disbanded in the summer of 1945. The men who had volunteered, who had given up rank to go to the line, were returned to service units. Rideout went back to driving a truck. In August 1945, he was refused service in a canteen in Marseille by an American sergeant while wearing the bronze star he had been given for that ditch. He was discharged in 1946. He went home to Louisiana. He worked 31 years for the Southern Pacific as a machinist's helper, and then a machinist, and he rebuilt shotguns in a shed behind his house on Saturdays. And he never once in 3 decades told a customer where he learned to work steel with a file under pressure. He gave no interviews until 1991, when a graduate student named Dolores Fenn found his name in a battalion morning report while researching the volunteer platoons and drove 4 hours to knock on his door. He talked to her for 11 hours over 2 days. He was 70 years old. She asked him about the farm. There is a transcript. He is quiet for a long time. Then he says, "There was a wood pile been split fresh. Somebody split that wood that week." And then he says, "Ask me something else." She asked him something else. He never spoke about the Herlenhof again to her or to anyone, and the fate of the family who lived there does not appear in any American record of 13 March 1945. It sits there. It is not resolved. It was never resolved. In 1998, the Army, following the review of decorations awarded to black servicemen, re-examined a small number of Second World War files. Rydau's was among those considered. It was not upgraded. The reviewing board noted that supporting documentation was insufficiently specific. The citation was 91 words. The Army had written it that way itself. And the duck call, it is not in a museum. Nobody ever asked for it. It is in a kitchen drawer in Lafayette, Louisiana, in a plastic bag, in the house of his granddaughter, 6 inches of cracked cypress with a bootlace still knotted through it and no reed and no voice, exactly as it was when Alcide Rydau pressed it into an 11-year-old's hand in a duck blind in 1932. She has been offered money for it twice. She has said no twice. Like the video, if you think that drawer should have a plaque on it. Solomon Alcide Rydau died on 3 February 1996 in Lafayette, Louisiana, at the age of 75. The obituary in the parish paper ran 4 inches and said he was a veteran. It did not say of what. What do you do with a story like this? Not the heroism. The heroism is easy. The heroism is the part that plays well. What do you do with a man who was told his scorecards wouldn't be believed, so they weren't sent? Who was told his method was forbidden and was right, and was punished more thoroughly for the method than he was honored for the result? Who saved 15 men on a Tuesday morning and was refused a cup of coffee 5 months later while wearing the medal they gave him for it? And who, to see the wind, set a fire in a yard where somebody had just split the wood? None of it cancels out. It was never supposed to cancel out. That is what a real man in a real war looks like when you refuse to sand him down into a statue. He knew where the wind came from. He knew what it cost to make it visible. He did it anyway, and then he came home and worked 31 years and never explained himself to anybody. There is one thing in this story the record does not resolve. On the morning of 14 March 1945, a Battalion S2 sweep of the low field south of Utwiller counted 11 German dead. 7 of them are Rydau's. The German section that came down that field is documented in a divisional strength return as 18 men, 11 dead, 9 captured that afternoon. That is 20. Somebody in that field was not on any list. Somebody either walked away or was never counted or was never there. No American reported him. No German unit ever claimed him. The discrepancy was noticed by exactly one person, Dolores Fenn, in 1991, sitting at a kitchen table with a 50-year-old strength return and a 70-year-old man. She said, "Sir, the numbers don't work." The transcript records that Solomon Rydau looked at the page for a while. Then he said, "No, they don't." And that is all he ever said about it. He died 5 years later. He never gave another interview. He never explained. Maybe it means nothing, or maybe it means everything. If this story found you, if this name meant nothing to you an hour ago and now it means something, then leave his name in the comments. Just his name, nothing else. Let's build him a memorial right here in this comment section where history forgot to put one. Subscribe, because there are hundreds more of them, forgotten, waiting, and they deserve to be found.